Just going to test it out. Ooh, happy Friday. We are doing the Podshop.
Test 1 2 1 2 1 2.
Yep. Can anybody give us a thumbs up? Let us know that we're here, we're alive, we're cooking. How do we sound? Are we audible? Are we loud enough?
Oh yeah,
We sound good?
I think we're good. We're live.
How's everybody doing? Happy Friday. I'll warm us up with a little thing I learned on the interwebs today. We do a lot of copy reviews in the company. One of the words that I really don't like is utilize. And I was sort of vaguely under the impression that utilize was just kind of an sort of a pompous way to say use.
Uh-huh.
Like if you're ever talking to like some military person or some technical person or some copywriter trying to sell something, they'll say utilize. And I thought just use. But I actually went on a little bit of an internet thing today and I realized that there's a real use to the word utilize. So basically you use something for its intended purpose and you utilize something to do something outside of its intended purpose. So you use a spoon to eat ice cream. You utilize a spoon to unjam the door.
I see my 2-year-old son utilizing a lot of things.
Go get a shout out in the comments. Thank you for joining us. Any news from the pod shop before
Look at all these people. Scotty Brill's from Dallas.
Ooh.
Hey, man.
Hey, Scott.
Tom, Rico, That Remote Life, Zach, Steve A, Elliot.
Happy hour.
Anthony. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday from Silicon Valley. Wow, I didn't know we've reached that far.
Fancy.
Man, I don't even know if we can afford to broadcast there. How much are we paying to get there? That's expensive. A little bit of news for me this week, Dan. Stonks are down.
Incredibly.
Stonks are down this week. I can't believe it, but they are down. The other news is, we've been watching this Michael Jordan show on Netflix. Not a basketball fan until now. I mean, I watch the championship games and stuff like that with people like you, and because you keep it interested. You know, you tell me everything that's going on. But man, Michael Jordan is just a force of nature. A force of nature, and leadership and everything that goes on with that guy. But here's the most interesting thing I think about Michael Jordan so far in the documentary, if you haven't watched it. This isn't really a spoiler alert, but hold on with me. Top performing athlete in the world for several years, and he's a smoker. The guy's he's chain smoking cigars like pre and post game. Like he's a smoker.
He's a smoker.
Michael Jordan's a smoker.
What are you going to do with that information? I don't know.
I just didn't think top performing athletes were smokers, but unless they're baseball players. But
you know what I like about this? The younger generation who goes to basketballreference.com and they look up the stats and stuff and they make these arguments that LeBron James is the greatest basketball player of all time or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar or whatever. I think to myself, partially I'm worried that am I the old guy? That's like back in my days, I used to stay up past my bedtime and watch Michael Jordan dunk the ball all over the NBA. But this documentary has vindicated my view that I love there was one moment in the documentary where the SportsCenter host, and at the time SportsCenter was like absolutely the most hilarious thing on TV. And this just in, Michael Jordan is human. I mean, the stats for this guy just like that copywriting problem at the beginning, the stats don't really capture what's really happening. Stats are these generalities. They are approximations of reality. And look, if you just run a business by the stats, if you're just counting life, you're going to miss out on big opportunities.
I can't recommend this series enough. Yes, it's called The Last Dance. It doesn't matter if you're into basketball. If you get to see how organizations work through here. You get to see how the Bulls organization work. You get to see how coaching works. You get to see how players work. You get to see Michael Jordan. It's fascinating to me because essentially these sports franchises are businesses.
Yeah.
That's what they are. And so to get to see how they operate is interesting because a lot of these journalists, a lot of people that are covering sports, they think they're just covering sports, probably half of them, but really they're covering how a business operates.
Yeah.
Which to me is very interesting. I mean,
an enterprise that needs to win. And one of the things, like, we're going to talk about, if you look at the link below, a lot of you have written to us. Today's topic is a bit emotional. It was this idea of what is the emotional reason or worldview, philosophical idea or experience that helped you to see the possibility of entrepreneurship. And I'm really curious about this, actually, because it occurred to us as we were reading through your responses about your 1,000-day story that you can drop in the link below, which we're reading all of them and discussing them. It occurred to us that so many of us feel so different from the people around us in our lives. Like, somehow we're just these weirdos. Like, why do we see things this way? Why are we willing to, like, make less money, to work harder and suffer more stress? What is it about us? And often we can look back that there was some formative experience. And today we're going to call that the crack up. And we're going to get to that. But one of the things that I think it put me and you both in touch with is that there is this fantasy amongst a lot of us that, you know, my career sucked, clients suck, I'm going to start a business, people are going to click on things on my website, and I'm going to make money in my sleep, and, like, life is going to be cool. And then you watch Michael Jordan and you realize that for him to win, there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of things that they needed to press each other and solve problems on the fly. And it was not only stress, but eustress, positive stress that pushed them to succeed. You know, the other night we walked out of this thing and Ian gets out on the patio and starts yelling at me, and he drops down and starts doing some push-ups and says, I'm not going to ask you to do anything I wouldn't do. And it's like you know, it's a pump up, but it also is a reminder that if you're sitting in your quiet office that's padded up and you don't ever want to suffer any conflict or challenges, then you might not reap the rewards. And I think that's pretty motivating.
A couple more things of bits of news here, Dan, before we get on to the episode. It's Friday, so that means it's happy hour. I got my tab.
Cheers. You
get your sparkling water. Everybody grab a drink. We're going for a bike ride after this, so hydrating. And then final thing is we have some really interesting things going on in our business, and specifically down at my job, things that we've been working on a lot, and we're going to put the pedal to the metal a little bit more on that next week. So I think that this is probably the last official live stream that we're going to schedule for Friday.
Yeah.
Although I think we're probably going to do more in the future. This is kind of it for our regularly scheduled show. So
we take requests, though. Thanks for popping in. Thanks for dropping questions in, following along. Thanks for sharing your 1,000-day story. Basis of today's discussion, as well as a series of blog posts that we're actually working on. It's cool. I mean, we're rethinking this idea of the 1,000-day principle, which is, of course, the idea that you have to make less money for 3 years, full-time effort building a business before you replace your professional open market valuation. And it's just a pattern we see time and time again. And after reviewing so many of your submissions and talking with you about it, we actually discovered that there was something that happened way, way, way before the 1,000-day principle. And I thought of it as I read a tweet today by Nicholas Nassim Taleb, who's basically my favorite Twitter follow because he's just such a jerk and funny and smart and just right and sometimes wrong and just interesting. Anyway, he's talking about the Mediterranean character, which is something he talks about a lot with some bravado, like, which is hilarious, okay? But one of the things that he points out is to be of Mediterranean character.
And by the way, like, I think that this is a fun thing to do to characterize people. You know, it's not necessarily true, but you travel around the world, or maybe just travel around your neighborhood. There's all these people, these creatures, these characters that you start to pick out, and this is what he does here.
Totally, and you know, he associates himself with this and is part of it, and it's his identity. So he's allowed to talk about it. So he says, you need to be Mediterranean character. You need to both disrespect hard work and respect success. Exactly the opposite of, like, work ethic, Northern European, Protestant, American kind of this whole thought frame and identity. And he was trying to explain like why some large entities don't work in this area of the world, because you have a scale problem, because you cannot be alpha, aka the boss, if you are not free and self-employed. An employee of Goldman Sachs is of a lower status than the local doctor. And he goes on to talk about how when they translated the ancient Greek, they would say Caesar had a bridge built rather than Caesar built a bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And clever point, interesting. But it got me thinking a little bit about how we identify and the experiences that drive us to be such insane people. I mean, how many of us have been at the dinner table and trying to describe why we believe entrepreneurship is wiser, maybe smarter, maybe more interesting, worth doing, and people are just like, the fuck are you talking about? You know? And it just feels like this rare page to get on. And so one of the things that's very obvious, I think a lot of you in the chat and certainly to us, is that this is a non-obvious life path. And it is not one that is highly desirable to most people. Of course, the outcomes, everybody wants to, not work so much and be rich and all that. But like the actual life path itself is not that desirable, I think, to many people. And that's what we want to explore today. Why are we so twisted and sick individuals?
Well, getting back to the doctor being more well respected than the Goldman Sachs, let's just call it, I don't know, VP or whatever it is. That's an interesting questions for Americans to ask themselves. It's like, why do you put this person above this other person that's maybe saving lives or changing communities or providing a service to people in need? Why do you put them below somebody that works for Goldman Sachs? And I think the answer for most Americans is just money. It's just that person makes more money, which is an interesting thing it's an interesting conclusion to come to. Is we put these people up here because they make more money, not necessarily because they create more value, but because they create more money.
Yeah, totally. And I think maybe, a lot of times, maybe I'm speaking with someone from a different culture and I'm talking about the journey I went on as an entrepreneur. And for someone else, it could just be this obvious thing, and maybe because I came from that culture, that there was this idea I had to reprogram and deprogram out of that. One of the sneaky, most powerful things about moving to a foreign country is like all of that, a lot of that kind of stuff falls away because like you don't even understand the status games that are being played. And so you kind of have to like build it back up for yourself. Like, what do you want to do? Whereas if you're in your home country, it's quite easy to like fall into that identity of like what everybody's doing and what's my place on the hierarchy here. So one of the things this caused us to do is to rewrite the epochs of the 1,000-day principles. And this is something that we got from you guys responding in the chat below. So, of course, the 1,000-day principle happens after you make your first sale. But before that, we always had this period called the yearning. And that would be like when you do things like apprentice, like when you start Googling how to make money online, stuff like that. And we discovered through your responses that there's actually a phase before that we're going to talk about today called the crack up. Just to be comprehensive here. So after it's the crack up, then the yearning, your sort of apprentice phase. That typically takes 3 years, but a lot of you said it taken a decade. Then you got your first sale. Then you got the 1,000 days, which is basically the grind.
Just another Wednesday.
Then you've got day 2,000 to 3,000. We're calling that the middle game on the podcast, like in chess. Things are a little bit less clear. There's a million different moves you can make. Like in the early days of running a business, it's pretty clear what you got to do. Product market fit, get your key employees in place, make sure your profitability is in line, scale. But in the middle game, it's like you could do a lot of things. And that's when, if you're a chess player, like the middle game is the hardest part because it's like I could do any number of things here. It's complicated. And then we've got the frontier, which is sort of this final phase, selling, building wealth. Actually, the middle game is where a lot of the wealth tends to come, day 2,000 to 3,000. But a discussion for another pod. Today, circle it back to this idea of the crack up. All right. So to be an entrepreneur, I think you need to be inspired and jaded. Just like a little bit of a mix that we all have. And I'm seeing this in all but a few cases. Like there's some moments that help you to see the opportunity and also screw up your worldview, like poke holes in it. I remember I read this book by Daniel Quinn when I was in high school. It was called The Story of B, and he has a famous one called Ishmael.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, and I don't think all people would be delighted, but I think a lot of entrepreneurs would be, that I thought the world was one way. And it's a commentary on history and how it works in human history. It's very similar to Sapiens. In fact, if you haven't read Sapiens, probably a better bet nowadays. Same kind of story. Basically, like, you think humans are this thing that you read about, but actually humans are like, there's a lot more going on there that was never written about, or was written about and destroyed. And it's like this experience of, you have a worldview, and then the author like knocks on the door, and you didn't even know there was a door there, and you open it up and you realize you're just in like one apartment of reality. Mm-hmm. I know I'm talking like I did some kind of mushroom trip. It was just a book, you know.
You were 19.
But the same thing can happen with entrepreneurship, and it can come through a variety of different means. So here I'll list a few, and I'm curious if you guys have any that you would share. One could be meeting a hero, meeting someone that you admire. Often you're disappointed. You realize they're full of shit, or that they weren't who you thought they were, or their life isn't so great. Mm-hmm. So why would I want that? Sometimes it's travel. Sometimes it's meeting a key career goal. I remember one time when I got a really big raise, I realized that it didn't change my life that much. So it kind of deflated my worldview a little bit. Like, well, why am I trying to make a lot of money if that doesn't solve my problem? It could be having bad options and being unemployable. It could be your back's against a wall. Like, you know, a lot of, it's very difficult to start a career in entrepreneurship if everything's really good. Maybe you need something that's difficult. It could be finding a mentor, someone that you admire and want to emulate. It could be a recession or a global pandemic, something that comes in and says, hey, one of the most heartwarming things is, I always feel like a little uncomfortable in America. And I think it comes back to the money thing you talked about. Like, our cultural aim, our cultural gods, they don't quite resonate with me. I feel a little uncomfortable with them. And actually seeing how Americans are behaving during the pandemic has been awesome in a way, because people are incredibly open-minded. They're evaluative. They're taking fresh looks at things. They're kind of a DIYer society at its core. And this sense that like we're all just going to believe in the Goldman Sachs path or whatever is something that's always perturbed me about America. And so that's kind of cool. Being oppressed could be one. I've never particularly oppressed in my life, but this is something I've heard about talking to other people. It's like, if traditional channels aren't open to you, if a lot of what people do to make a living in reality in larger organizations is they play politics.
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of us get disillusioned with. So if you aren't in the right category to play politics effectively, maybe you have to resort to doing your own thing. And, money don't play politics. Money goes to whoever earns it.
Right? I would say that was a big part of my reason for getting into entrepreneurship, actually. And it wasn't necessarily oppression, but it was this idea, it was this reality that people in positions of power are exerting power on you, basically, or over you, right? And it's like something that's that I try to get away from, and I still try and get away with it. It's because a lot of self-elected, self-announced people trying to make somebody do something that they don't necessarily want to do, and you think like, screw this, I'm not gonna participate in this. And so I do think that in America there's a lot of that kind of oppression going on. But it's a different kind of we don't have an oppressive dictator. Well, take that back. We might be on our way to that, but it's a different kind of oppression.
Well, I'll say this. I'll share one of maybe two of my crack up experiences, and then maybe we can hear some of those that are in the chat.
A couple things that are coming in here. Somebody says the story of B and Ishmael are must reads, and then Points Panda. That's Freddie. Ishmael.
What up, Freddie?
He says communist propaganda. and then Zach says it's called Yankee ingenuity. Well, Dan is from the North. So.
I grew up in the North, and the summer, I can't remember I think it was the summer after I graduated high school. Me and my best friend worked in a factory for a few months to save up money. And it was a fun factory to work in. We weren't the best employees, but we got paid. And we flew to Mexico City because we could get there cheap. And I remember that was like my first experience meeting what we would call backpackers now, or people that were on the lam, people just out there doing shit. And what's so dramatic about these people that I met, and I still remember this one guy from San Francisco, shout out Adam. And he was older, and so it was kind of cool to hang out with someone that's like out of your age group. As someone grew up where I grew up, you kind of hang out, it's either the baseball coach or your buddy.
Right.
And it was cool to hear like an adult's perspective on life and stuff. But what was remarkable to me was that he was free. Like, he didn't seem to have a job. Like, I didn't know how he made income. He was just going some other place the next week. I was there for like 10 days, right? Because it was like, I saved up enough money. I can do it for 10 days. Then I got to be back to go to college or whatever.
Probably knows this guy, Anthony Summer from Silicon Valley. I bet they're buddies.
Shout out Adam. I remember then, so fast forward, I go through all this university education and stuff, and I start to get jobs in business. And I was working my way up in organization. I was becoming a more valuable player. And I remember one time I wrote in a blog post, when we were sitting in these cheap cubicles at this job, you wake up at 6:13, you put on your khakis, you drive on the highway, whatever. People are preoccupied with condos, their mortgages, what they're going to do that weekend, blah, 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 blah. And when I was dreaming of those early travel experiences with Adam and with my buddy, it wasn't it cool to see Mexico? Yeah, it was amazing to see Mexico. But it was actually the freedom, like this idea that for this 10 days of my life, I actually owned it. And then it was like back to whatever the teacher said, back to whatever, like I took a big loan, so I got to pay it back. And then it was like, I got to pay off my car payment. So now I'm on the highway to go to this thing. And I remember fast forward to I'm 25. So this is 6 years later, maybe almost 7 years later. That notion of being like Adam felt impossible. Like, what? How does one even do that? This is 7 years. I can't figure this shit out for 7 years. And I think it was this idea of like being this supposedly important person who has a successful job that was actually probably the height of like other people being impressed by what I do was like that job. And it's all been downhill since then. So if you're looking for accolade, like this isn't the path.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, I don't have like some basic rights that some dude on the lam had that I met 7 years ago. And so what's the freaking point? And I think that was like this big crack for me. I was like, I literally can't do shit, even though I'm supposedly important. And it really forced me to question like what I was doing with my life. And then the final one is one that we talk about a lot, which is, and maybe you look back and you see the cracks and you look forward and you say, well, where am I going? And that's the corner office test, which is, I had to look down the office and say, best case scenario, I'm in the office in 10 years. Is that where I want to go? And the crack up happened and the yearning began.
With these crack ups, I don't know how often they happen all at one time. Maybe life or death situation could propel you into something like that, where it's just a total mind shift, like you're going 180 degrees in the other direction. But it's been my experience, and it sounds like your experience too, and people that I've talked to, where it's kind of a culmination of things. It's just little tink here, a little tink there. It's like, man, it's getting kind of annoying. Like I can't really ignore the fact that I can kind of see a different reality through these holes now in this eggshell. I'm like, what is out there? Like I can't ignore it, This is going to bother me if I don't break open this egg.
I'll tell you a common crack up is a lot of what modernity is all about is passing tests, meeting requirements, applying to things, doing the right thing, kissing some buns, and then getting the money coming in. Yeah. And one of the most common crack ups you'll hear is like, oh, I made a little money on eBay. Played a poker game and made a little money. This idea that money can just like appear is not an obvious thing. Certainly to me, I wasn't a lemonade stand entrepreneur. Another sneaky crack up is understanding the power of leadership. So for a lot of people, it's like, oh, I started making a little bit of money on eBay, and now I see like the opportunities of being a trader, and now I want to go from trader to entrepreneur. I want to up level my skills and make more money. Leadership is a sneaky, undervalued, and difficult one to notice. But if you can hatch a plan and get people on board and have a sense of belief that something's going to happen and that you can inspire other people to come along with you, whether it's your customers or your clients or whatever. I mean, that's the fundamentals of sales. And if you know that sales skill set, selling to employees, selling to your clients or whatever, that's kind of the magic key to the kingdom. And so leadership, if you're wondering whether or not, this crazy life path is for you, I think looking at that kind of down that path into your past, like, was I an effective leader? Can I lead people? Do I feel comfortable doing it? Because that's really the name of the game down the road.
And Zach mentions, coming back to the Yankee ingenuity, the phrase refers to the self-sufficiency of early America. Also, American can-do spirit, and something that propels to invent, reinvent, and strive. That's something that's truly uniquely American, and some other cultures share this, but it's something that we do very well. And it's also the reason why we're so destructive, is because I think we think we can just create again, and everything's going to be okay, and we're going to solve our way through this problem.
We're a very young culture,
very young and optimistic still. But I think you're right, Zach. On an individual level, this is why America probably produces more entrepreneurs than anywhere else in the world, is because we do embody this idea of invent, reinvent, and strive. And because, we got off the boat and we basically said, we're not paying taxes anymore.
Take your tea back.
Take your tea back. Get out of here. And I'm not paying for that boat rental either.
So the call to action here is really this realization we've had from speaking with you guys that there is this, whether it's your story of B moment or your eBay moment, or like, I don't want to be the sucker moment. Often there is like a very much deeper emotional and psychological drive that pushes us down this path. And it might not just be a matter of looking at the spreadsheet and saying, oh, I want to have more upside. It might be something deeper than that drives us here. And if that resonates with you, I'd love to hear about it. Just click on the link below. We're just reading the responses and using them as inspiration to create blog posts that hopefully can inspire, thousands others. I mean, thousands of people have read this 1,000-day principle, and it has gotten them to get started on their journey. In part,
some questions are trickling in, and let's take some minutes to do that.
That's it. Let's take Q&A. That's the end of our prepared remarks. I cede to the gentleman from Virginia.
Yeah. Again, this is an opportunity to ask Dan and myself some embarrassing questions, since we don't know when the next time we're going to do one of these is. But in the meantime, Frank has a real question. How do the 1,000 days apply to lemonade entrepreneurs, those that have had entrepreneurial endeavors since childhood? Well, I was one of those kids. I think I can answer that. And maybe I wasn't the most successful lemonade seller, but I'd say, gosh, I was like early teens, maybe 11, 12, 13. I can't remember. My uncle and I had this idea to sell bandanas, basically to the local park. So we would ride our mountain bikes. Me and my family would ride our mountain bikes through these trails, and I was all about mountain biking. But there was I knew all the trails, and I named them on my own and all this stuff. And so, but how can anybody else possibly get around in this area, So I think he had the great idea to get these bandanas and then silkscreen on them the maps. So you're wearing it, or it's tied around your handlebars or whatever, you whip it out. This is pre-cell phone. And we went down, we made a bunch of them. Yeah. Well, I still got one of them. I'll bring them on the show next time. And went down to the local park authority or whatever, and sold them to them. They had them hanging in the window and made a couple $100 when I was young. And it was really cool to see that process. My uncle, he's not an entrepreneur. He's a successful dude, but it was something fun to do together. But it was one of the first tastes I got of hey, I know something that not a lot of people know, which is I know all these trails back here. I've named them. I'm going to make this map. And sure enough, people bought it. And so that was one of the first times where I thought cool idea, and it worked.
Right.
And that gets to be addictive. Gets to be addictive. I'll
say this, if I can interpret it as a non-lemonade stand entrepreneur, the crack up, whatever form that comes, seems to be necessary but not sufficient. And as you move up along, I always use this metaphor because it's one of my favorite all-time sports, which is the tractor pull. The longer you get down that course, the more the weight moves over the axle and the less likely you are to be able to continue. It's the same thing with these 1,000 days, which is like, look, it's pretty easy to have a realization that maybe that kind of job is bullshit, or maybe there's a more efficient way to make money out there. Maybe you could be richer if you opened your own business instead of work for somebody else. Now, it's a little bit harder to then get rid of a job that is nice but a dead end and take a step back and go apprentice for somebody for years on end. And you don't know what's going to happen. And it even gets harder than when you do it yourself. And then the middle game comes along and all the good news is still ahead of you. So that's kind of my take on it, is like, yeah, you got to have it, but it's not enough.
Tom says, I'm curious if the 1,000 days applies if you switch from freelancing to business owner in a related industry. It's a good question. We were actually talking about this before the show started. It's like, what phases of the 1,000-day principle do you repeat, and which ones do you not repeat? And I think the answer to that is today's show, which is the crack up. Basically, the crack up happens and you can't recover from it. But it really only happens once, right? You kind of see through it and you're like, this is bullshit. I'm never going back. But then all the other phases, they kind of repeat themselves depending on where you are in the business. I mean, here we are starting some new ventures recently, Dynamite Jobs, and I feel like I'm starting all over as an entrepreneur in a lot of ways. I mean, I have I have a lot of the same skills, but I have a bunch of skills that I need to learn. I need to understand how this industry works. There's a lot of things that I don't know. So I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm starting not from square one, but from after the crack up.
Yeah, there's a kind of an exit velocity. We talk about exit velocity that can come from careers, but it could also come from other ventures that, could actually steamroll your 1,000 days. So it depends who your clients are, what you know about them. I mean, if you learned a real sweet product resonance from them, you could absolutely have a hot product on your hands in the matter of a weekend. So the answer is we don't know, and you don't know, and that's really the tough part. Is we were talking with an investor today about how he speaks with a lot of entrepreneurs, and the one thing he doesn't envy them is that sense of uncertainty and the deep existential stress of like the survival of your company is sort of on your back. And it's something that can actually crack you up too. And, other people don't understand you, man, because it can hurt in a way that you don't have a lot of other people to talk about it. Part of what we talk about at Dynamite Circle events is a lot of that. Like, I retweeted a tweet today that Taleb, my favorite Twitter follow, pointed out something. He said it eloquently in a way I couldn't quite say it myself, which was, look, online events, like you go to an online event and there's a bunch of speakers and they teach you stuff. He was kind of like, you're going to have to do better than that online event because that's not what events are about. And he just started listing off all this stuff, and events are about meeting friends. They're about cornering potential clients in the bar, and getting them to close. They're about finding someone that it was just that kind of stuff that's harder to even articulate. Yeah. And that's basically the commiseration that so few people end up feeling, because it is a tough journey to get through those 1,000 days.
So long story short here, Tom, 1,000 day, does it apply if you switch from freelancing to business owner in a related industry? I think it definitely does. It's like 1,000 days is 1,000 days from when you make your first sale, essentially. You will replace your income.
I'm torn, Tom, because on the one hand, I don't want to give anybody a speed limit.
Yeah.
Right? But on the other hand, I think it makes sense to plan conservatively. And look, if you're not willing to do it for 3 years, or if you're not capable because your structure of expenses doesn't set up that way, then bad bet, right? So at least plan on it taking 3 years, and hopefully you can find a shortcut. I wrote down when we were doing our notes today, this concept of like everything is between a polarity of hacking and grinding. And so hacking is like finding shortcuts and tricks and tips and being clever. And all entrepreneurs need to be clever. And most books and blog posts focus on the clever part. Very few focus on the grind part, which is like, yeah, and do that every day for 5 hours, even when it doesn't work out, and then do it again, and then do it again.
Just another Wednesday.
Yeah.
Jeff says, this is a question for Dan, although he didn't say it was for Dan, but I know it's for Dan because it couldn't be for me. What rom-com is on deck for tonight? It's a good question. It's Friday night.
That's a good one. What's a good rom-com?
What would you watch tonight if nobody was over your shoulder or sharing the screen with you? Guilty pleasure rom-com
I'll
tonight.
tell you a good one that's like niche-y, and I think it's a Netflix original.
I love it how serious you're taking this question.
Fuck yeah, dude. I love romantic movies. There's one called Always Be My Maybe or something. It's by it's just a cool, it's an Asian cast, which I'm like into this whole thing of like let's get an Asian ensemble cast together. And one of the cool things that when you have an Asian cast involved is you bring food into it, which Asian food is amazing. And one of the lead characters is like a fancy chef. And then the other guy has a hip hop band. And so it's a good rom-com. That's what I choose.
Okay. Thanks for asking that question, Jeff. Ben says, candy selling is still one of my favorite businesses from middle school.
Oh yeah.
It's the easiest way to double your money overnight. I agree. And then Points Panda says, I almost got kicked out of school for selling bootleg PlayStation games when I was 13.
Killer.
Made hundreds of dollars. Then they made me donate all of it to the Israeli army. That's Freddie, which makes a lot of sense to me. I'm wondering who made you do that, your mom or the school? All right. Eric says, caught my son selling, I think it's origami ninja stars to his classmates. I was proud. Cool.
I love it.
Oh, here's a cool business. Mitko, how are you? I used to run a hookah bar from my basement in high school.
Oh, wow.
Cool parents, Mitko.
That's
I mean,
dope.
The smell that must have been coming out of your house.
Love a hookah bar.
Points Panda, Freddie, you got all the smart remarks today. What happened to Dan Norris 7-day startup? We at 1,000 now. Yeah.
Well, here's the thing about the 7-day startup is that, well, I think that book is actually amazing, and that you can get to day 1 in 7 days. I think that that's the point of Dan's book. And then to get to a point where you can walk away from the business for a month and still get paid as if you were a high-level professional from your staff working for it, I still think 3 years is a decent rule of thumb.
Kenton says, Ian, bring us back. That's the reason I'm on this show, actually. And Ben says, if you guys did more live streams, we would have to set over-unders on the number of times Dan mentions Taleb. You know, here's the thing, Ben. I've lived on and off with this guy, and I've done business with him for the past 10 years. The Taleb thing is actually a short list. There's a very long list that you can guarantee Dan will bring up on a daily or weekly basis. All right. Any advice? This is a serious one. Any advice for someone that's past the crack up and not sure which direction to go? Also, if they don't have any specific skills, like Dan. This is my favorite show.
Bag on Dan, like this. I welcome it. So if you're just into rom-coms and you had your crack up, the thing I always come back to is stop Googling around, stop reading books. All that stuff's noise. You have to go get a job and work for someone that you admire with a product that you understand and like, and you have to get paid for it. Now, if you want to do this with eBay and do your own shit, that's cool too. But you actually have to do some shit. You cannot figure this stuff out. You cannot read books. You cannot apply for an MBA program. All that stuff is off the table. That is seasoning. The steak is doing shit and getting paid for it. Do something, get paid for it. Because skills, again, books that talk about skills, those are not skills. Those are approximations of skills. Skills are things that you can do that affect organizations positively.
Yeah.
And you only learn those skills by affecting organizations positively. Like, look, one of the cool things about this, I call it the business ideas paradox. And it's simply this. If you're sitting in a situation, you're like, what is my business idea? You don't actually need a business idea. What you need is experience, right? And then if you have a lot of experience, you have too many business ideas. So it's this business ideas paradox. If you think you have a business idea, it means you don't actually need one. You need experience, because once you're embedded in an industry and you have skills in your bones, business ideas are very simple to come up with.
Yeah.
And it really becomes about saying which ones you don't want to do. And so you start like knocking down all your ideas rather than just, if only I had something to do, if only I had an idea, if only I had some kind of skill set. Here's the good news. Entrepreneurship itself is a skill set. So you don't necessarily need to go have some particular thing like copywriting, for example, that is typically peddled in the online marketing space. And that can even be a liability because then you're tempted to deliver the work yourself, which is a trap that agency owners get into all the time and freelancers get into all the time. Just never delivering the work yourself. That's the skill of entrepreneurship.
This idea too of skills, and I had Gino Wickman on the podcast 2 weeks ago, and we argued about this. Basically, he's like, "Oh, entrepreneurship is a formula." Like, I think it's a skill set. I think it's something that you need to work on. I think it's something that you can develop, right? And here's the idea, basically, is that
it's just a definitional error. You can say anyway.
Yeah, but
he was making a definitional error.
Yeah. Okay. So if you've gone through the crack up, right, and you're trying to figure out, like, I don't have any skills, what do I do? I think Dan and I have both agreed we would do different things, right, if we're in that phase of life. But one thing you can do, and I would rather do this any day of the week than go get a job, is buy a lawnmower off Craigslist for $30 and start mowing people's lawns, because I'm free as a bird. It's hard work, but I'm in control of my income. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and eventually I'm going to get pretty damn good at mowing a lawn, and maybe I'm going to get a better mower. And then all of a sudden I'm going to have all these people mowing the lawn for me, and I'm just going to do scheduling, whatever it is.
You know what I would do? Buy the mower and sell it for double.
You could do that too.
Learn sales. How about that?
You could do that.
Let's just go back old school. There is no, the combination of, like, in terms of ease of acquiring the skill and the profitability of it, and basically entire society's unwillingness to do it, to me, puts sales at the very top of the pecking order in terms of things that you can learn. And one of the things that's been occurring to me lately is, as I review shit tons of horrible marketing copy, is I realize that the people writing it have never sold anything. So they don't actually understand the emotion of persuading people. Instead, they've read countless blog posts from bullshit artists about how to bullshit people. And it's just this, every blog post that's informed by the last blog post gets worse and worse and worse until you need 10,000 people coming to a site to make a sale or one sale.
Yeah.
And so if you know how to sell, actually close one person, that will inform your marketing skill set. So don't learn copywriting, learn how to sell. And then the copywriting is going to come naturally from that.
Point being, I wouldn't be too upset, nervous, anxious, whatever. If you're seeing the light, now the world's yours, man. You could go do whatever you want. You can sell lawnmowers for double. You can sell people on mowing their lawn. It doesn't freaking matter, because now you're in charge of your life, and you've seen through the bullshit, and you're going to be good.
Except, of course, if you fail, in which case you'll probably be miserable.
Yeah, but you know what? The grass always grows. So the grass always grows.
All right, we're 45 minutes in, boss man.
Okay, let's wrap this up here soon. Greg Berry, nice to see you.
What up,
That's
Greg?
the problem with new entrepreneurs. They're afraid to sell. I agree. Noah Kagan, I assume, Ben says, would be all over this question. Get your first dollar and solve something for a wealthy friend. Yeah, all right.
Get a wealthy friend. That's a nice step, too.
Well, Points Panda has just retracted his message, so I can't read that. Yeah, Ian, 2020, buy the Miata, sell it for triple. I do that. That's right.
Did it.
Did it. Done it.
Got the t-shirt.
Cool, guys.
All right, everybody. We hope you have a lovely weekend. We hope you had a safe week. Again, we enormously appreciate your feedback, and the survey responses have informed our thinking and continue to flesh this thing out. And it's fun to have a discussion about these, like, live issues. This is going to be our last live stream that's regularly scheduled, but we're going to be on the Tropical MBA podcast, and we're going to be focused on Dynamite Circle and Dynamite Jobs next week. And we just feel at a time where we're, like, working on some new things that we just need every single day. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. And actually now's a very good opportunity to take advantage of, like, those solid 10-hour days, because we just don't have anything better to do. So it feels like, as maybe the world starts to open up a little bit, maybe 6 months from now, we start going to events again or whatever. There's more time pressure. So we really feel like now's the time to make hay. So hopefully we can inspire you guys to do the same.
Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Have a great weekend, and cheers.
Give me a shout out if you watch that rom-com, by the way. We can discuss it.